the second half.
Generally speaking, Madden is not a game that needs a whole lot of introduction. You pretty much know what to expect going in year after year. But to a certain degree, this year's game actually does warrant a bit of an introduction because it's the first game on the Xbox 360 and PS3 that could actually be considered truly great. First and foremost, what makes it great is this new weapon system that's been implemented in the game. There's always been this sort of natural role system within the NFL and within the Madden games based on like what kind of players there are. You know, there are guys who are possession receivers versus big play receivers. There are guys who are, you know, who can throw the ball real far versus throwing it really accurately. What this weapon system does is that it actually gives individual designations to these players that have these specific abilities. So when you're throwing the ball deep to say someone like Randy Moss, you're much more likely to see him leap up and do a big, you know, ridiculous catch than you are, say, with someone like Hines Ward, who would be considered more of a possession receiver. By the same token, Hines Ward would do a much better job grabbing the ball in traffic when there's a lot of defenders around him versus Randy Moss, who would probably drop it and get upended. There's these types of designations for every single position in the game, though not every single player is a weapon. There's also some new control functionality this year, some of which is old and brought back to this year's game from previous iterations, and some of which is all new. The defensive playmaker controls from the older console versions have finally made their way into the 360 and PS3 game. They're just as functional as they were before. You pick a player, set him to a defensive player, set him to blitz, set him to jump back into coverage, you know, whatever you want him to do. There's also some new differentiation in the hit stick. By pressing up on it, you'll actually tackle high, and by pressing down on it, you'll tackle low. And depending on what kind of ball carrier you're hitting, you might actually jar the ball loose, depending on how you go about it. There's also a new strip ball feature, so like when you tackle a guy and you press the strip ball button at the right time, you might actually knock the ball loose. That actually happens maybe a little too often in the game, as fumbles are actually very prevalent in this year's game. Many of the features in the game are untouched from last year. The mini games are all the same. Online play is basically untouched. Still no online league. Still just one-on-one head-to-head play. The big differences are in franchise mode, where owner mode has made its return. You can maintain finances for your team, get sponsorship deals, buy upgrades for your stadium, and if you're so inclined, actually move your team to a whole other city. That takes a bit of doing, since you have to kind of, you know, figure out the cost versus reward balance, you know, get a city that's actually interested in hosting a team, spend a whole bunch of cash, design a stadium, do a bunch of crazy crap, and then finally get your team to another city. There's also a new rookie scouting feature where you can actually hire a scouting agency, and over the course of the season you can select up to 20 different rookies that they will go in and scout for you, get you much more detailed scouting reports than you would otherwise get for those players that you want to target. For the most part, the graphics engine hasn't really changed this year from last year's game, though the big difference is in animations, where basically a lot of branching animations have been included in the game, which is sort of a fancy way to say guys will actually kind of do things like in real life, as opposed to just kind of going into can animations that would otherwise make it impossible to stop them from, like, say, going out of bounds or getting tackled, or, you know, say like you're a running back and you're juking past defenders and then you want to do a quick spin move. You'd have to wait for them to finish that animation before you could even begin the spin. Now, like, there's a little more player control. You can actually get a good feel, like you can kind of move and just do the moves as quickly as you want. The animation system is simply excellent. It actually affects gameplay. It makes it more fun. It's a lot more fun to watch, especially the big hits, and it's a really big improvement to the overall visual presentation. One of the big controversies this year is the fact that the PlayStation 3 version of the game runs a lot slower than the Xbox 360 version. The 360 version runs at a full 60 frames a second, the PS3 version only does 30, and it also tends to dip below 30 in spots and hitch up every now and again. This isn't the sort of thing that really changes how the game plays. The sense of speed is not necessarily as good on the PS3 version, and you do see these little hitch ups in spots, but it doesn't really affect the way you play the game. It doesn't really hinder gameplay. So while the difference is certainly there, and if you've got the choice between the two versions, you most certainly should go for the 360 version, the PS3 version isn't broken because of this. That issue aside, though, this is certainly the best that Madden has been on the 360 or PS3 to date. You get the feeling like the series is definitely on the right track and back toward getting to where it was a few years ago, and it's not necessarily quite there yet. But with the new weapon system and the new control scheme and the additions to the franchise mode, this is a Madden game that any football fan should be able to enjoy.